The cafeteria tray crashed to the floor with a sound that silenced the entire corporate dining hall. Soap splattered across designer shoes, and bread rolls scattered like fallen leaves. Maya Chen stood frozen, watching 3 months of careful budgeting disappear across polished marble tiles while 200 executives stared in complete silence. What happened in the next 60 seconds would expose a secret that shattered everything she thought she knew about power, loyalty, and the man she'd been serving coffee to for 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had never imagined she'd end up working in the executive dining room of Morrison Industries. 6 months ago, she was finishing her master's degree in social work, planning to change the world one family at a time. Then her father's medical bills arrived, and the world changed her instead. The job posting had been simple enough: executive dining services, good pay, flexible hours, perfect for someone juggling night classes and mounting debt. She'd expected to serve coffee and clear tables for a few months, just long enough to get back on her feet. The Morrison Industries tower stretched 47 floors into the Seattle skyline, all glass and steel and the kind of money that made problems disappear. Maya's world occupied exactly one floor, the executive dining level, where deals worth millions were discussed over lunch and careers were made or destroyed between the appetizer and main course. She'd learned to move through that space like air itself, invisible but essential. The executives spoke around her as if she didn't exist, discussing mergers and acquisitions while she refilled their water glasses, debating personnel changes while she cleared their plates. She'd become expert at selective hearing, tuning out conversations that weren't meant for her ears. The other staff had warned her about certain executives: Mr. Patterson from legal, who never said please or thank you; Mrs. Davidson from marketing, who sent back her meal if the temperature wasn't perfect. But nobody had warned her about Victoria Sterling. Victoria Sterling was perfection wrapped in cruelty and tied with a designer bow. Everything about her screamed money and power, from her perfectly styled auburn hair to her collection of handbags that cost more than most people's cars. She was married to someone important, though Maya had never bothered to learn the details. Executive wives came and went from the dining room, but Victoria was a regular, holding court at table 7 with her circle of equally polished friends. Maya's first encounter with Victoria had been unremarkable. A simple lunch service, replacing empty bread baskets and ensuring water glasses stayed full. Victoria had looked through her as if she were transparent, continuing her conversation about charity galas and vacation homes without pause. The second encounter had been different. Maya was clearing the adjacent table when Victoria's voice rose above the ambient chatter. She was describing a recent shopping trip to Paris, laughing about how she'd spent more on a single dress than her housekeeper made in 6 months. Her friends had giggled appreciatively, but Maya had caught something else in Victoria's tone: not just privilege, but genuine pleasure in the inequality. The third encounter had sealed Maya's opinion. Victoria had knocked over her wine glass deliberately, Maya was certain, just as Maya was passing with a tray of clean dishes. The wine had splashed across Maya's uniform, staining it deep red. Victoria had looked at the mess with theatrical concern and suggested that perhaps the staff should be more careful around important guests. Maya had apologized, cleaned up the wine and changed her uniform. She'd also made a mental note to request different tables when Victoria was dining. But today none of that mattered, because today was different. Today Maya was carrying her own lunch tray through the executive dining room for the first time in 6 months. The company policy was clear: staff could eat in the employee cafeteria on the ground floor or bring their own meals to the small break room behind the kitchen. They were never under any circumstances to eat in the executive dining area. But Maya's supervisor had called in sick, the replacement was running late, and Maya's shift had extended through her lunch break. She'd grabbed a simple meal from the staff kitchen: vegetable soup, a dinner roll and water. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. She'd planned to eat quickly at one of the small service tables near the kitchen entrance, finish her meal and get back to work. She hadn't counted on the lunch rush running late. She hadn't expected the dining room to still be half full. And she definitely hadn't expected Victoria Sterling to still be at table 7, holding court with her usual audience of perfectly manicured socialites. Maya had tried to be invisible. She'd chosen the smallest table in the corner, kept her head down, and eaten as quickly as politeness allowed. The soup was warm and comforting after a long morning shift. The roll was fresh. For a few minutes, she'd almost felt like a regular person eating a regular lunch instead of someone whose job was to fade into the background. That's when she'd heard her name. Not called out, but spoken in a tone that made her stomach drop. Victoria's voice carrying across the dining room with the particular sharpness reserved for discussing something distasteful. Maya Chen, that's her name. One of the serving girls. Can you imagine the presumption? Eating in here like she belongs with the rest of us. Maya's spoon had frozen halfway to her mouth. Around Victoria's table, heads had turned in her direction. Not kind looks, not curious looks. Predatory looks like she was entertainment that had just walked onto the stage. She belongs downstairs with the other help, Victoria had continued, her voice growing louder. There are rules about these things for a reason. Standards to maintain. Maya had considered her options quickly. She could finish her soup and pretend not to hear. She could pack up her meal and leave quietly. She could apologize and explain about the supervisor's situation. All reasonable choices that would minimize conflict and let her keep her job. Instead, she'd done something that surprised even her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She'd continued eating. Not defiantly, not rudely. She'd simply taken another spoonful of soup and continued her lunch as if Victoria Sterling's commentary was nothing more than background noise. Because that's all it was, she'd told herself. The opinion of someone who'd never worked a day in her life didn't need to dictate whether Maya finished her meal. But Victoria Sterling wasn't accustomed to being ignored. The conversation at table 7 had grown louder, more pointed. Victoria's friends had joined in, their voices carrying across the dining room like a Greek chorus of entitlement. They discussed the declining standards of service staff, the importance of maintaining proper boundaries, and the general deterioration of respect for social hierarchies. Maya had finished her soup. She'd eaten her roll. She'd sat quietly for exactly the amount of time any other person might sit after finishing a simple lunch. Then she'd stood, picked up her tray, and started toward the kitchen. She'd made it exactly 12 steps. The collision had been spectacular. Later, Maya would never be quite sure if Victoria had stuck out her foot intentionally, or if she'd simply chosen that moment to adjust her chair. All she knew was that one moment she was walking carefully with her tray, and the next moment she was stumbling forward, the tray flying from her hands as she tried to catch her balance. The empty soup bowl had shattered against the marble floor. The water glass had exploded on impact. The small plate that had held her roll had skidded across the floor like a ceramic hockey puck. Maya had managed to stay upright, but just barely, and now she was standing in the middle of the executive dining room surrounded by the debris of her lunch while every conversation in the room ground to a halt. Victoria Sterling had risen from her chair like a queen ascending her throne. Her friends had leaned back in their seats, suddenly distancing themselves from whatever was about to happen. The other diners in the room had turned to watch, sensing drama like sharks sensing blood in the water. "Look what you've done," Victoria had said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "This is exactly what happens when people forget their place. This is what happens when standards slip." Maya had dropped to her knees immediately, gathering pieces of broken ceramic with shaking hands. She'd apologized repeatedly, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd tried to clean up the mess as quickly as possible, hoping to minimize the scene, hoping to disappear back into invisibility before things got worse. But things were already getting worse. Victoria had stepped closer, her designer heels clicking against the marble like a countdown timer. She'd looked down at Maya kneeling among the broken dishes with an expression of pure disgust. "You don't belong here," she'd said, her voice cold and clear. "You never have. This pathetic display just proves what I've been saying. Some people simply don't have the breeding to understand proper behavior." Maya had continued cleaning, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Around them, the dining room remained frozen in silence. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her, judging her, finding her as wanting as Victoria clearly did. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Victoria had demanded. "Any explanation for this embarrassing spectacle?" Maya had looked up from the broken ceramic, her hands full of sharp fragments and her dignity in tatters. She'd seen Victoria's face, beautiful and cruel and absolutely certain of her own superiority. She'd seen Victoria's friends leaning forward eagerly, waiting for more entertainment. She'd seen the other diners, some looking uncomfortable but none willing to intervene. And in that moment, kneeling on the cold marble floor of a dining room she'd never belonged in, Maya had made a choice that would change everything. "I'm sorry," she'd said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm sorry for the accident. I'll clean this up and pay for any damage." Victoria's eyes had narrowed. "That's not enough," she'd said. "This isn't just about broken dishes. This is about respect. This is about understanding your place in the world." Maya had stood slowly, still holding pieces of broken ceramic. Around them, the silence had grown heavier, more expectant. "I understand my place," Maya had said quietly. "I work here. I do my job well. I treat everyone with respect. And I expect the same in return." The words had hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's face had flushed red with fury. "How dare you?" she'd whispered. And then louder. "How dare you speak to me like that? Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" Maya had looked around the room at all the faces watching her humiliation like it was evening entertainment. She'd thought about her father's medical bills, about her postponed dreams, about all the time she'd bitten her tongue and smiled and served people who treated her like furniture. "I know exactly who you are," Maya had said. "You're someone who thinks money gives you the right to be cruel. You're someone who's never worked for anything in your life but believes that makes you better than people who have." The reaction had been immediate. Gasps from around the room. Victoria's friends had recoiled as if Maya had physically struck their leader. And Victoria herself had gone pale with shock and rage. "You little nothing," Victoria had snarled, stepping so close that Maya could smell her expensive perfume. "You insignificant little nothing. I could have you fired with a single phone call. I could make sure you never work anywhere decent in this city again." Maya had held her ground, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Maybe you could," she'd said. "But that doesn't make what you did right. And it doesn't make who you are any less ugly." The dining room had erupted. Voices everywhere, some shocked, some excited, some calling for security. Victoria had raised her hand as if to slap Maya, her face twisted with fury. And that's when the voice had cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stop." Everyone had turned. Victoria had frozen with her hand still raised. Maya had looked toward the voice and felt her world tilt on its axis. The man standing in the dining room doorway was tall and lean, with dark hair and the kind of quiet authority that made rooms go silent. He was wearing an expensive suit, but Maya barely noticed that. What she noticed was his face. What she noticed was the way he was looking at Victoria with an expression of complete disappointment. What she noticed was that she'd been serving him coffee every morning for 2 years, and she'd never once heard anyone mention that he was married. Victoria's hand had dropped to her side. Her face had gone from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. "Marcus," she'd whispered. "I didn't know you were here." Marcus Sterling had stepped into the room, and Maya had finally understood why Victoria Sterling was always at table 7 in the executive dining room of Morrison Industries. Marcus Sterling wasn't just any executive. He was the founder, the CEO, the billionaire whose name was on the building. And he was looking at his wife like he was seeing her clearly for the very first time. Marcus Sterling moved through the silent dining room with measured steps, his presence commanding attention without effort. Maya watched him approach, her mind racing to process this impossible revelation. The quiet man who had always nodded politely when she served his morning coffee was the billionaire owner of everything around them. "I asked what's happening here," Marcus said. His voice calm but carrying an edge that made Victoria take a step backward. "Nothing serious, darling," Victoria replied, her tone suddenly sweet and conciliatory. "Just a minor incident with one of the staff members." She gestured dismissively toward Maya and the broken ceramic scattered across the floor. "I was simply explaining proper workplace behavior." Marcus's gaze shifted to Maya, who was still holding fragments of her shattered soup bowl. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her think he was seeing more than just the surface of the situation. "Miss Chen, isn't it?" he said, and Maya felt her heart skip. She hadn't realized he even knew her name. "Would you mind explaining what happened here?" Victoria's face flushed. "Marcus, really, there's no need to interrogate the help. I've already handled the situation appropriately." "I'd like to hear from Miss Chen," Marcus replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Please, go ahead." Maya looked around the dining room at all the faces still watching her. Some of the executives looked uncomfortable now, sensing that the entertainment had taken an unexpected turn. Victoria's friends seemed frozen in their seats, uncertain how to navigate this new dynamic. "I was eating lunch during my break, sir," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "My supervisor called in sick, and my shift ran long. I grabbed a simple meal and sat in the corner to eat quickly before returning to work. I finished and was taking my tray back to the kitchen when I tripped and dropped everything." She looked directly at Victoria as she continued. "Your wife felt that my presence in the dining room was inappropriate and expressed her concerns about staff maintaining proper boundaries." Marcus turned back to Victoria, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. "Is that an accurate summary of events?" Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Well, of course she's going to make it sound innocent. The fact remains that she was eating where she doesn't belong, and when confronted about it she became argumentative and disrespectful." "Argumentative how?" Marcus asked. "She questioned my authority," Victoria snapped, some of her earlier fury returning. "She actually had the audacity to lecture me about respect after causing this mess. The girl clearly doesn't understand her position here." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between his wife and Maya. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "Her position here," he repeated. "Tell me, Victoria, what exactly do you think Miss Chen's position is?" "She's serving staff," Victoria said, as if stating the obvious. "She's here to work, not to socialize or eat in the executive dining room like she belongs with her betters." The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the room, Maya heard several people draw sharp breaths. Even Victoria's friends looked mortified by the bluntness of the statement. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, Maya saw something that looked like deep disappointment. "I see," he said. "And you believe that makes her less deserving of basic human dignity." Victoria's mouth opened and closed without sound. She'd clearly expected support from her husband, not this careful interrogation. "Marcus," she finally managed, "I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this. She's just a waitress." "Just a waitress," Marcus repeated, and Maya heard years of quiet observation in those 3 words. "Miss Chen, how long have you worked here?" 6 months, sir," Maya replied. "And before that, I was finishing my master's degree in social work." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I took this job to help with family expenses while I completed my studies." "Social work," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Planning to help families in crisis, I imagine. Important work." "Yes, sir." Marcus turned back to Victoria, and his expression had hardened into something Maya had never seen during their morning coffee exchanges. "You're right about one thing, Victoria. Miss Chen is staff here. She works hard, shows up on time, and treats everyone with courtesy and professionalism. She's also working toward a master's degree to help families facing difficult situations. She took this job not because it was beneath her, but because she needed to support her family while pursuing something meaningful." Victoria was staring at him in confusion. "Marcus, why are you defending her? She embarrassed me in front of everyone." "She embarrassed you?" Marcus's voice rose slightly for the first time. "Victoria, you just called another human being your better in front of a room full of people. You suggested that her work here makes her somehow less worthy of respect than you are. If anyone should be embarrassed, it's me." The dining room was so quiet that Maya could hear her own heartbeat. She'd never imagined that this moment could get more surreal, but Marcus Sterling was publicly defending her against his own wife. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I want everyone here to understand something about the staff in this building. Every person who works for Morrison Industries, from the executive team to the maintenance crew, contributes to our success. Without people like Miss Chen ensuring that our workplace runs smoothly, none of us could do our jobs effectively. He gestured toward Maya, who was still kneeling among the broken ceramic. This woman serves coffee at 6 in the morning to executives who often haven't had time for breakfast. She clears tables after long meetings so the next group can have a clean space to work. She does dozens of small tasks every day that make all of our lives easier, and she does it all while pursuing her own education and supporting her family. Victoria's face had gone completely white. "Marcus, darling," she whispered, "you're making a scene. People are staring." "Yes, they are," Marcus agreed. "And I'm glad, because I want them to hear this. I built this company on the principle that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their role or background. That principle apparently needs reinforcing." He looked around the room at all the watching faces. "I'm disappointed that it took a situation like this to make that clear. I'm disappointed that anyone in this room thought it was acceptable to watch another person be humiliated for the crime of eating lunch. And I'm particularly disappointed in anyone who believes that money or status gives them the right to treat others as inferior." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Several executives were studying their hands or their phones, suddenly fascinated by anything that wasn't happening in the center of the room. Marcus walked over to where Maya was still kneeling and extended his hand to help her up. "Miss Chen, I apologize for what happened here today. This should never have occurred, and it certainly shouldn't have escalated to this point." Maya took his hand and stood, still clutching pieces of broken ceramic. "Thank you, sir, but I should clean this up and get back to work." "The maintenance team will handle the cleanup," Marcus said firmly, "and I think you've done enough work for today. Why don't you take the rest of your shift off, with pay?" "That's really not necessary, sir. I insist." Marcus turned back to Victoria, who was standing frozen by table 7 like a statue of elegant mortification. "Victoria, I think we need to have a conversation. A private one." Victoria's friends had already started gathering their purses and making quiet excuses about other appointments. The entertainment was clearly over, and none of them wanted to be nearby when the real drama began. "Marcus, please," Victoria said quietly. "Not here, not in front of everyone. You made your feelings about class and status very public," Marcus replied. "I think my response should be equally clear." He addressed the room again, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I want to be absolutely clear about the policies of this company. Every employee, regardless of their position, is entitled to respect and dignity. Harassment, humiliation, or discrimination based on job title, education, or economic status will not be tolerated. Anyone who can't abide by these standards should consider whether they belong in our organization." Maya watched Victoria's face crumble as the implications of her husband's words sank in. She'd just been publicly reprimanded by the CEO of the company, and everyone in the room understood that she was being lumped in with people who might not belong in the organization. "Miss Chen," Marcus said, turning back to Maya. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Maya nodded, still overwhelmed by the surreal turn the day had taken. Marcus gestured toward a quiet corner of the dining room, away from the dispersing crowd. "I owe you more than an apology," he said once they were out of earshot. "I owe you an explanation." "Sir, you don't owe me anything. You defended me when you didn't have to." "Actually, I do have to," Marcus said. "Not because of company policy or legal requirements, but because it's the right thing to do, and because I should have done it much sooner." Maya looked at him questioningly. "I've watched my wife interact with the staff here for months," Marcus continued. "I've seen the way she treats people she considers beneath her notice. I've heard comments, witnessed small cruelties, and I told myself it wasn't my business to interfere in her social relationships." He paused, looking genuinely troubled. "Today showed me how wrong I was. When someone I care about is being cruel, it is my business. When it's happening in my building to my employees, it's definitely my business." Maya wasn't sure how to respond. The man who had always seemed so distant and professional during their brief morning interactions was revealing a depth of character she'd never suspected. "I've been thinking about making some changes in my life," Marcus said quietly. "Personal changes that I've been putting off because they seemed too complicated, too disruptive." Today clarified things for me. Maya felt like she was witnessing something intensely private, something she shouldn't be hearing. Sir, I should probably go, she said. This seems like something you should discuss with your wife. You're probably right, Marcus agreed. But first, I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You handled an impossible situation with more grace than anyone should have to muster. And I want you to know that your job here is secure, regardless of what happens next. Thank you, sir, that means more than you know. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it was a genuine warm expression instead of the polite professional mask she was used to seeing. Also, he said, I've been reviewing our employee benefits program. I think you'll find that we've added some educational assistance options that might help with your studies. Maya stared at him in shock. Sir, I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. It's investment. This company benefits when our employees grow and develop their skills. Consider it enlightened self-interest. Before Maya could respond, he was walking back toward Victoria, who had been watching their conversation with growing alarm. Maya gathered her things and headed toward the kitchen exit, her mind reeling from everything that had just happened. As she reached the doorway, she heard Marcus's voice behind her, speaking to his wife in tones too low for her to make out the words. She didn't need to hear them. The expression on Victoria's face told her everything she needed to know about how that conversation was going. 3 months later, Maya was sitting in her first class as a full-time graduate student, her tuition covered by the Morrison Industries Educational Assistance Program. Her father's medical bills were manageable now, thanks to the company's improved healthcare benefits, and a promotion to the Executive Assistance Program that came with a substantial raise. She still worked in the Morrison building, but now she was helping coordinate programs between the company's corporate foundation and local social services agencies. It was exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing, bridging the gap between resources and need. Marcus had kept his word about changes in his personal life. The divorce had been quiet but swift, with Victoria relocating to her family's estate on the East Coast. The gossip had lasted about a week before being replaced by newer scandals. Maya had worried that working so closely with Marcus might be awkward after everything that had happened, but she'd discovered that the quiet thoughtfulness she'd glimpsed during their morning coffee interactions was actually his true personality. He was demanding but fair, brilliant but approachable, and completely committed to using his success to make things better for other people. The morning routine had changed too. Instead of serving him coffee, Maya now joined him for brief meetings to discuss foundation projects over coffee that they both poured themselves. It was during one of these meetings that Marcus brought up the dining room incident for the first time since it had happened. I learned something important that day, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. I learned that staying quiet when you witness injustice makes you complicit in it. I should have spoken up much sooner. You spoke up when it mattered, Maya replied. That took courage. Not as much courage as standing up to someone when you had everything to lose and nothing to gain, Marcus said. You could have apologized and walked away. You could have let her humiliate you to keep your job. Instead, you held on to your dignity, even when it seemed like it might cost you everything. Maya smiled, remembering that terrifying moment when she'd decided to speak truth to power. My father always told me that respect isn't something you can demand, she said. It's something you have to earn by giving it freely to others first. Smart man, Marcus said. I'd like to meet him sometime. Maya looked across the table at the billionaire who had changed her life by choosing kindness over loyalty, justice over comfort, and principle over convenience. I think he'd like that, she said. He always said you can judge a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Then I hope he approves of how I'm treating someone who's already done more for me than she knows. Maya raised an eyebrow questioningly. You reminded me who I wanted to be, Marcus explained. You showed me that integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when it would be easier to look away. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Two people whose lives had been changed by a moment of cruelty that revealed the true character of everyone involved. The broken ceramic had been cleaned up long ago, but the lessons learned that day continued to shape everything that came after. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.